Good morning and good day. Welcome to 3:15 o'clock, that very channel where the unspoken becomes unforgettable. Do you have the courage to explore the stories they always wanted to hide from you? This is not just a horror channel. This is a place where silence is shattered by secrets, and every story carries a weight of fear it was never meant to bear. The first story. A contract of silence. The silence here wasn't just an absence of sound. It was tangible, viscous like tar. It pressed on the eardrums, forcing them to catch non-existent noises, the own pounding of his heart, the hum of blood in his temples, the creak of the old house's bones, which seemed to be holding its breath and waiting. Marcus Goldberg, a real estate agent with 20 years of experience and the nose of a vulture, stood on the threshold of the Vander mansion and felt uneasy. Not because of the desolation or the dust. He'd seen worse. His problem was different. He adored sounds. The click of a lighter, the jingle of keys in his hand, the echoing thud of his own footsteps on parquet. This was the music of business, a symphony of success. And here the symphony had frozen on a pause, and this pause had already lasted far too long. The mansion was a real find, a gold mine, as he had mentally dubbed it. A Victorian-style house, built at the end of the 19th century, on a huge plot of land in the middle of nowhere, where even cell service was a struggle. The previous owners, Mr. and Mrs. Vander, had fled from here, abandoning everything, furniture, clothes in the closets, even half a dinner set on the kitchen table. Their lawyer, a pale young man with trembling hands, had handed Marcus the keys and a contract where the sale price was laughably low. "They just want to forget about this place as soon as possible," the lawyer had said, avoiding eye contact. "No bidding. Any price you name will be accepted. Just be careful in there," Marcus had snorted. "Be careful." A standard scare tactic for naive buyers to drive the price down. Although the Vanders, by the looks of it, didn't need to drive the price down. They had simply fled, and now he was here. The key turned with difficulty in the rusty lock, and the heavy oak door opened with a quiet, yet piercingly loud creak in this silence. The air inside was stale, smelling of dust, mustiness, and something else. Sweetish, almost medicinal, like in an old pharmacy. Well, handsome. "Let's have a look at you," Marcus said loudly, and his voice sounded like a desecration, a rough and alien chord cutting through the ringing stillness. No echo answered. The sound seemed to drown in the drapes and carpets, unwilling to reflect off the walls. He started with the living room. Luxurious, though dust-covered furniture, a massive fireplace, bookcases with spines darkened by time. On the marble mantelpiece stood a photograph in a silver frame. A happy couple, the Vanders, smiling on some resort. Their smiles now seemed like a cruel mockery. Marcus took out his phone to take a few pictures for the catalog. The flash illuminated the room, and for a second the shadows came alive, hiding in the corners. He walked around, deliberately stomping his heels loudly on the floor, testing the strength of the boards. He whistled. He coughed. He did everything to fill the oppressive emptiness, but the silence only thickened, absorbing his noise like a blotter absorbs ink. He ascended the wide staircase to the second floor. The carpet on the steps was worn down, as if someone had repeatedly run up and down in panic. A long corridor led into darkness, doors on either side. The first led to a study, a massive desk, a chair, shelves, everything in perfect order save for a thin layer of dust. No hint of haste or disorder. The next room was a bedroom, a large four-poster bed, a dressing table, a mirror in a gilded frame. Here, too, a strange order reigned. Marcus walked over to the wall, where a painting in a worn-out frame hung. Some boring landscape. He was about to look away when he noticed a barely visible scratch on the wallpaper next to the frame. Not deep, more of an indented stripe, as if someone had dragged something hard across the surface. Curiosity, a professional habit of inspecting every little detail, took over. He reached out a finger to check the texture of the wallpaper, ran it along the scratch, and a whisper came from the wall, barely audible, hoarse, as if coming from a deep well. A single soul-chilling syllable. Hush. Marcus jerked as if electrocuted and jumped back from the wall, bumping into the dressing table. A small bottle of some perfume fell onto the carpet but didn't break, instead rolling silently under the bed. He froze, staring at the wall, pressing his back against the door jamb. His heart was pounding wildly in his chest, and he forced himself to take a deep breath. Imagination, he whispered to himself, and his own whisper sounded terribly loud. A draft. Old house. Creaking. But there was no draft in the house. The air was motionless, dead. And that whisper had been too clear, too meaningful. He shook his head, trying to shake off the stupor. Get it together, Goldberg. Millions don't fall from the sky. They're found in dumps like this. He left the bedroom and headed further down the corridor, deciding to finish the inspection and get out of here as soon as possible. His confidence was shaken, and now he caught himself stepping more carefully, almost on tiptoe. That damned silence was beginning to press on him again. He found himself in the living room on the second floor, a spacious room with access to a small balcony. It was empty, save for a piano in the corner, covered with a white sheet. It resembled a ghost frozen in waiting. Marcus felt a tickle in his throat. Nerves dust. He couldn't hold it back. He coughed loudly, right into that oppressive silence. And the world exploded. The whisper crashed down on him from all sides at once. It didn't just appear, it materialized, crawled out from under the baseboards, from the cracks in the floor, from the ventilation grates, from behind the sheet on the piano. It was hoarse, hissing, multi-voiced, dozens, hundreds of voices merging into a single furious, hissing shriek full of inhuman malice. Silence. The sound was a physical blow. Marcus gasped and pressed himself against the wall, his eyes bulging. He froze, unable to move, paralyzed by pure animal terror. The whisper fell silent as suddenly as it had appeared, but its deafening hum still rang in his ears, and now the silence, returned to its place, was 10 times more terrifying. It was angry, watchful. His heart was pounding somewhere in his throat, and this sound, loud and uncontrollable, seemed to cut the air like a knife. He was afraid to move, afraid even to breathe, and then he saw her. In the far corner of the room, where the shadows were the thickest, something stirred. A shadow detached itself from the wall, stretched, took shape. It was a figure unnaturally tall and thin, as if stretched on a rack. Its skin was deathly pale, almost phosphorescent in the gloom. It had no eyes, no nose, nothing that resembled a face. Only a huge, unnaturally wide mouth, a lipless slit, a black hole leading to nowhere. It moved silently, not touching the floor, gliding smoothly toward him. A cold emanated from it, carrying that same sweetish putrid smell he had noticed upon entering. Marcus wanted to scream, but no sound escaped his dry throat. He could only watch as the monster approached, filling the space, absorbing the already scarce light. It floated right up to him. Icy breath, smelling of grave cold and old books, burned his cheek. The figure leaned in, and the faceless head inclined toward his ear, and whispered. The voice was quiet, rustling like dry leaves underfoot, and at the same time it pierced right through, drilling into his brain. In this house, only one sound is permitted. A scream, but it too ends quickly. The words hung in the air. The creature didn't move, as if giving him time to comprehend what had been said. Then it slowly, just as silently as it had appeared, began to retreat, dissolving into the corner, merging with the shadows, until nothing remained but a memory and an icy cold in his bones. The paralysis released Marcus. He collapsed to his knees, gulping air convulsively. His body shook with fine tremors. He had to run, immediately, right now. He rose on trembling legs and, almost beside himself, rushed for the stairs. He didn't look around, didn't think of anything but the door. His footsteps on the carpet were soundless, and he blessed that. He flew down, grabbed the handle of the massive front door, and yanked it toward him. The door didn't budge. He pulled again with all his might. Nothing. The lock didn't move. He looked back. The mechanism was simple with 2 bolts. They were open. The door should have opened. He threw his shoulder against it, but the wood was solid as rock. Panic, cold and nauseating, rose in his throat. He began to beat on the door with his fists, but the sound of the blows was muffled, dull, as if he were being wrapped in cotton. Silence. The whisper came from above, from the stair landing. It was quieter than the first time, but no less terrible for it. It held a threat, a warning. Marcus recoiled from the door as if burned. His eyes darted around the hallway, searching for another way out. A window. There was a large arched window in the living room. He ran into the living room. The window was boarded up from the outside with massive wooden planks. A thin beam of light broke through a crack between the boards. He ran over, tried to slip his fingers into the crack to pry a board loose. Useless. The nails were driven in tight. He scanned the room. The fireplace? No, it was too narrow. Other windows. He dashed into the dining room, into the kitchen. All the first-floor windows were tightly boarded up with the same planks. He was trapped. The sun outside the window was slowly setting, and the colors of the day began to fade, filling the mansion's rooms with thick purple shadows. It was getting darker inside with every minute. Marcus leaned against a cold wall, trying to calm the trembling in his hands. He pulled out his phone. No service. The icon was treacherously empty. He tried to dial the emergency number 911. Nothing. The mobile was just a useless piece of plastic and glass. He laughed. A quiet, hysterical, stifled chuckle. The sound of his own laughter frightened him even more. He bit his lip until it bled, forcing himself to be silent. Tears welled up in his eyes, tears of helplessness and animal fear. He had to last until morning. He froze, pressing himself into the rough surface of the wallpaper, trying not even to breathe. The chuckle stuck in his throat like a lump. Tears of self-recrimination and fear streamed down his cheeks silently. He was a real estate agent, a master of deals and negotiations, and now his main task was not to make a single sound. The irony was as bitter as wormwood. His thoughts raced in panic like rodents caught in a trap. Morning. I have to last until morning. But what would change then? The door wouldn't open by itself. The windows were boarded up. His car was parked half a kilometer from the house, on an old overgrown road. No one was looking for him. He was completely alone here. Alone with this place. With them. The sun had finally surrendered and twilight quickly thickened into full night. The rooms plunged into a darkness so thick it seemed you could touch it. Marcus crawled along the wall, feeling the path ahead. He needed a corner, shelter, a place where he could sit with his back to the wall and see all approaches. His professional mind, already switched to survival mode, feverishly assessed the layout. The study on the first floor. There was that massive oak desk. He could hide under it. He crawled on all fours, moving with monstrous slowness. Every movement was calculated to avoid the slightest rustle. He would lift a hand, move it, lower it to the floor, checking with his fingers for any crunchy debris or creaky floorboard. Then he would just as carefully pull his body forward. Progress was agonizingly slow. Impenetrable darkness reigned in the living room. Only weak moonlight, seeping through the cracks in the boards on the windows, painted pale stripes on the floor. He crossed them like a criminal crossing laser security beams, holding his breath. Suddenly, a creak came from somewhere on the second floor. Marcus froze, turning into pure hearing. The creak repeated. It was the sound of a step, slow, heavy, not the silent sliding of that entity. This was a different sound. More material, but no less eerie for it. Step, pause, step. Someone was walking in the corridor upstairs. No, not walking, pacing, as if searching for something. Or someone. Marcus pressed himself against the leg of an armchair, trying to make himself smaller. His heart was beating so loudly he thought the pounding must be echoing throughout the entire house like a drum roll. He clamped his hand over his mouth, trying to muffle his own breathing. The steps from above fell silent. A new sound was heard. A quiet, wet slapping, as if someone was wiping the floor with wet rags. The sound was coming down the stairs. Marcus, forgetting all caution, crawled faster. Only a few meters remained to the study. He crawled into the dark doorway, recoiled from something soft and elastic, a hanging coat, and finally pressed his back against the massive wooden leg of the desk. He huddled in the corner, pulled his knees to his chest, and covered himself with his sweater, trying to hide at least the whiteness of his face and the gleam of his eyes. The wet slapping became clearer. It was in the hallway. Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, praying to all the gods he had never known for it to pass by. But the sound turned into the living room. Slap, 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 slowly, leisurely. Another sound mixed with it, a quiet squelching and gurgling, as if the creature was completely covered in some kind of muck, and the smell. That same Swedish putrid smell became thicker, more unbearable. Now it clearly carried notes of decay and stagnant water. The slapping steps approached the study. Marcus saw a vague silhouette in the doorway, blocking the already meager light. It was low, squat, teardrop-shaped, and it was dripping. Drops fell from it onto the floor, and each sound of a falling drop made Marcus flinch. The creature stopped in the doorway, breathing heavily. Its breath was raspy, gurgling, as if its lungs were filled with the same muck that covered its body. It turned its head toward the desk. Marcus understood this from the change in the sound of its breathing. He didn't see any eyes, but he felt a heavy, attentive gaze upon him. He held his breath, feeling oxygen deprivation beginning to tinge the edges of his vision crimson. A new sound came, a quiet, investigative sniff, as if the creature was drawing in air, tasting it. Sniff, pause, sniff. It could smell him. It could smell his fear, his warmth, the sound of his blood. Marcus curled into a ball. Images flashed through his head. His office, a cup of coffee, the laughter of colleagues, sunlight on the street. That was another world. Unreachable. Suddenly, somewhere upstairs, deep in the house, a door slammed loudly. The wet creature in the doorway shuddered, emitting a short, displeased, gurgling sound. Its attention switched. It turned around and sloshed away from the living room toward the stairs. The sounds of its movement quickly faded away, dissolving somewhere on the second floor. Marcus exhaled, almost coughing from the long breath hold. He was wet with cold sweat. He was shaking. He sat under the table, unable to move, and listened. The house sank back into that ominous, tense silence, but now he knew it was deceptive. It was alive. It was full. An hour passed, maybe more. The framework of time had blurred into a continuous nightmare. Marcus dared to stick his head out from under the table. The moon stripes on the floor had shifted. The night was at its peak. He was desperately thirsty. His throat was parched from fear and breathing through his mouth. The kitchen. He had to get to the kitchen. There had to be a tap there. The thought of water became an obsession. It drowned out even the fear. Carefully, centimeter by centimeter, he crawled out from under the table and crawled along the corridor. Memory suggested the layout. Straight, then left. He crawled past the dark void of the staircase, not looking up, feeling the cold space leading to the second floor on his back. The kitchen greeted him with the smell of old wood, dust, and decay. He crawled to the sink. His hands found the cold enamel, then the tap. He remembered that taps in old houses often squeak. It was a lottery. He pressed his lips into a white line, gathered his courage, and began to slowly, with incredible tension, turn the faucet handle. The tap gave way with a quiet, hissing creak. Marcus froze, listening. Nothing in the house changed. He turned the tap a little more, and finally a single drop fell from the spout. It hit the enamel of the sink with a sound as loud as a gunshot. A thin stream of rusty water gushed out after it. He stuck his head under the stream, catching the water in his mouth. It was warm, nasty tasting, smelled of iron and old pipes, but it was the nectar of the gods. He drank greedily, trying not to make noise, smacking and choking. Having drunk, he decided to wash his face to get rid of the sticky sweat and tears. He wet his palms and ran them over his face, and with his wet fingers, he brushed against the edge of his sleeve. The fabric made a quiet but distinct rustling sound. Shuff. It was enough. Right above his head, in the ventilation grate above the sink, a furious, hissing sound erupted. Shh! Marcus recoiled from the sink, hitting his back against the kitchen unit. Something poured down from the grate, not dust, but something fine and dry, like husks or dried insects. He craned his neck, expecting another nightmare to appear from there. But instead, he heard a new sound. At first quiet, barely perceptible, it grew with every second. It was crying. Child's crying. Pathetic, frightened, coming from the dining room. Marcus became even more frightened. It was a trap, bait. He understood that rationally. But the sound was so real, so alive and full of genuine suffering that his legs carried him forward on their own. What if it was a real child? A prisoner like him? Maybe the Vanders had forgotten someone? He peeked out from the kitchen into the dining room. In the center of the room, in a puddle of moonlight, sat a little girl in a white dress. She was sitting with her legs tucked under her, crying, her face buried in her knees. Her small shoulders trembled. "Hey," Marcus whispered, not believing what he was doing. Who are you?" The girl raised her head. Her face was pale, tear-stained, but quite normal. She looked at him with huge, tear-filled eyes. "I'm lost." Her little voice was thin, trembling. "Help me, I'm scared." "Quiet," Marcus gestured, looking around. "You can't make noise here. Come to me, quietly." He reached out his hand to her. The girl stopped crying. Her face suddenly became strange, detached. The tears on her cheeks stopped glistening, as if they had turned to dust. "Can't make noise," she repeated his words. But her voice changed. It became hollow, lifeless, like stone grinding against stone. Only one sound is permitted. Her mouth stretched into a smile. Too wide, unchildlike. Inside there were no teeth, only darkness. "Scream!" she hissed in a completely different adult voice full of hatred. She lunged from her spot with inhuman speed, not standing up, but simply flying through the air like a puppet on strings. Straight at him, her mouth stretching, ready to swallow him whole. Marcus recoiled in horror back into the hallway, tripped over his own boot, and fell to the floor. The fall was heavy and loud. The air was forced from his lungs with a whoosh. Upstairs on the second floor, something heavy and large stirred. A satisfied gurgling rumble was heard. The wet slapping began to pound down the stairs, gaining speed, and from the dining room, the girl was crawling out, her limbs moving with a disgusting, clicking plasticity, the stretched smile not leaving her face. Marcus crawled away from both of them, backing toward the living room. He had no escape route. No hope. He pressed his back against the closed front door. He was trapped. And then from his chest, against his will, erupted the one and only permitted sound, the one the inhabitants of the house had been waiting for. The silence was torn to shreds. It was a long, piercing, absolute scream of utter terror. The second story. The city of Denver had long crafted its own legends, but even against that backdrop, the house on Plum Street stood out with a special, clinging dread. It didn't just stand, it leaned, like a huge, drunken coffin, sunk into the damp earth at an angle that defied all laws of physics. It seemed that one awkward movement, one loud sound, and this architectural absurdity would collapse into a pile of rotten wood and shattered glass. It was here, on a dare, for foolish bravado and a shot of adrenaline, that Laura Mitchell and her friends had come. What a palace, Ben exhaled, tilting his head back. His fan football scarf seemed screamingly out of place against this gloom. Look, the windows on the second floor are all different. Like they were collected from different houses. He was right. The windows were of different shapes, sizes, and glass, some blind and dark. Others seemed to absorb the dull light of the Denver evening, turning it into a thick, impenetrable murk. "Perfect place for a selfie," Chloe said with false cheer, pulling out her phone. "My followers will be jealous." Laura was silent. Her usually iron nerves had failed her back at the gate. This house was oppressive. Not physically, but in another way. It pressed on memory, on the subconscious, whispering something ancient and evil. The air around was thick and still, like in an aquarium. "All right, scaredy cats." Mark, the ringleader and author of this venture, was already pushing the creaky door. "The loser pays for all the rounds tomorrow. No backing out." Inside, it smelled of mold, dust, and something else, sweetish and medicinal like an abandoned pharmacy. The floor groaned pitifully underfoot. The beam of the flashlight snatched from the darkness empty rooms, floors littered with broken bricks and shreds of old wallpaper hanging in tatters. But the main thing that struck them immediately was the mirrors. They hung everywhere, on every wall, in every room, even in the hallway. Large and small, inexpensive carved frames and simple wooden ones. They were covered in such a thick layer of dust and cobwebs that it seemed it wasn't glass, but the matter, blind eyes of some giant insect. "Creepy," Chloe whispered, and her voice was swallowed by the oppressive silence. "Who hung them all up here?" "Our collector," Mark smirked, running his finger over the glass of one mirror, leaving a greasy trail. Collected windows outside and inside mirrors. An aesthete. Laura lagged behind the group. She was drawn to a room at the end of a long corridor. The door was ajar, and a faint flickering light came from within, as if candles were burning inside. She pushed the door. The room was empty, save for a huge wall-sized mirror in a heavy, dark frame. It was cleaner than the others, as if it had been wiped recently. Laura stepped closer, feeling a strange magnetic pull. Her reflection was blurry, indistinct in the dim light falling from the window. She sighed, adjusted a strand of hair, and at that moment her reflection in the mirror continued moving. It didn't just shift, it lived its own life. The hand Laura had already lowered was still reaching for her hair in the mirror, and then the corners of its gutta-percha mouth slowly crept up, forming a wide, unnatural, ear-to-ear smile. A smile full of inhuman, soul-chilling pleasure. And the grinning thing waved at Laura, slowly, playfully, like an old acquaintance. Laura froze, her blood turning to ice. Her brain refused to believe it. She didn't breathe, didn't blink, staring at the double that was waving at her while she herself stood completely still. No. A strangled rasp escaped her. "This can't be." In response, the grin in the mirror widened even further. And then Laura heard a whisper, not from outside, but right inside her head, quiet, hissing, like the sound of steel on stone. "Watch." She jerked back, flew out of the room, and crashed into Mark. "What's with you?" "You're white as a sheet," he grinned. "See a ghost?" "The mirror," she gasped, pointing a finger at the door. "There." It moved. Mark looked into the room, shone his flashlight. Empty. And the mirror's just a mirror. "Nerves got to you, Mitchell. Come on, we haven't seen the second floor yet." They moved on, but Laura couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She felt that gaze on her back, heavy, clingy. She turned around. At the end of the corridor in one of the rooms, a shadow flickered. Low, hunched over. On the second floor, the window collection was displayed in all its glory. They walked through a suite of rooms, and each had its own unique window, a tall Gothic one, a round one like a porthole, a tiny one near the ceiling, a stained glass one. And behind each of them was darkness, thick, absolute, as if the house was floating in a cosmic vacuum. Chloe approached a large panoramic window, trying to see the street. Can't see a thing. Like it's covered with a blanket. Weird. Laura went to another window, a narrow, pointed one. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, peering into the impenetrable blackness outside. And suddenly that blackness shifted. It became less dense, took shape. The outline of a human figure. Laura's heart sank. In the pitch black, a centimeter from the glass, stood a woman. Her face was a pale blotch etched with shadows, her hair a tangled dark cloud. But her eyes were two bottomless wells of pure animal terror. They held a deep, all-consuming panic so profound that it immediately sent shivers down Laura's spine. And in the woman's hand, pressed against the glass, clutched in a white bony fist, was a knife. Long, with a wide blade, on which the light from the room glinted dully. She didn't move, She just stood and stared at Laura with her crazed gaze. Her lips were silently whispering something, the same word, syllable, incantation, over and over. Guys. Laura's voice dropped to a whisper. Over here, quick. See something again? Mark said with annoyance, but he came over. He looked out the window. So what? Nothing there. Darkness. Laura rushed back to the glass. The woman was still there. She was right in front of her, her eyes literally drilling into Laura, full of silent plea and despair. What do you mean, nothing? She's right here. With a knife, look! Ben and Chloe also ran over, peered out. Laura, it's empty. You're really not well. Maybe we should go. They couldn't see her. Only Laura could see the silent horror outside the window. The woman slowly raised her free hand and pressed her index finger to her lips in a universal gesture. Quiet. Then her eyes darted somewhere to the side, behind Laura's back, and a new wave of panic flashed in them. She jerked back sharply and dissolved into the darkness. Laura recoiled from the window. We have to leave. Right now. Come on. Mark rolled his eyes. A bet's a bet. I'm not losing because of your fantasies. Suddenly, a deafening crack came from upstairs, as if a huge door had been torn from its hinges. Everyone flinched. What was that? Chloe asked fearfully. Probably the wind knocked something over, Ben said uncertainly. Or someone's here. Mark finally darkened. All right, let's check it out and get the hell out. This dump is really getting on my nerves. They went towards the sound, climbing a creaking staircase to a small attic. It was empty. Only a broken window pane lay in the center, as if it had been broken from the inside. The wind howled through the hole, see? No one. Mark turned to Laura, but his face suddenly twisted in confusion. Hey, where's Chloe? They froze listening, silence thick ringing. Chloe? Ben shouted. In response, only a mocking multiplied echo. They rushed downstairs, shouting their friend's name. The rooms on the first floor were empty. Laura, frantic with fear, burst into that very room with the large mirror, and froze. The mirror was clean, shining, and in it, clear and sharp, she saw Chloe. Her friend was standing in an unfamiliar hospital-like room with shabby walls. She was beating her fists against the mirror's glass, her face contorted in a scream, but not a sound could be heard. And behind her, slowly approaching with a shuffling gait, was the same woman with the knife. Her eyes still blazed with terror, but on her lips now played that same horrible, unnatural smile that had been on Laura's reflection. No. Laura screamed, rushing towards the mirror, but it was too late. The woman in the mirror caught up to Chloe. The reflection of the knife flashed. The woman's crooked smile grew even wider, almost ear to ear. And then the image in the mirror shuddered, fluttered, and went out, turning into ordinary dusty glass, reflecting only a pale, frantic Laura. Footsteps sounded behind her. Mark and Ben ran into the room. We found her phone in the hallway. Mark fell silent, seeing Laura's face. What happened? They hadn't seen. They didn't understand. She's here, Laura whispered, backing away from the mirror. She's everywhere. She's not outside. She's inside them. These windows, these mirrors. It's not just glass. They're doors. And she's stuck between them. She's the collector, but she's the prisoner. And she wants out. She's swapping places. At that moment, the light from the windows finally died completely. The house was plunged into absolute impenetrable darkness. And in the silence, very close, came a grinding sound. That same familiar sound of metal being sharpened on stone from hospital corridors. And a quiet, breaking whisper of a laugh, full of madness and longing. The shadow at the end of the corridor flickered again. It was closer now, and it held in its hand a long, familiar object, casting dull gleams in the utter blackness. They understood. There was nowhere to run. The house had long since snapped its trap shut. The windows looked into nothingness. The mirrors showed a nightmare. And the woman with the knife, the eternal prisoner between worlds, had finally found a new collection. And she didn't need frames. She needed new faces for her mirrors. The third story. The wallpaper. The first night in the new house smelled of dust, wax, and other people's lives. a smell that Daniel called the aroma of potential, and that Teresa, with some strain, called the smell of history. The house on the very outskirts of Chicago was the only one they could afford without a monstrous mortgage stretching 3 generations into the future. It was old, gloomy, with massive oak beams and creaky floors, but its main pearl, which had won Teresa over at first sight, was the wallpaper. It covered the walls of almost every room, a complex, hypnotic pattern of intertwining branches and leaves receding into infinite depth. The colors had faded, the paper was cracked and peeling at the seams in places, but it had its own charm. It was as if the walls were breathing with 1,000 sleeping forests within them. "Sleep tight, my darlings," whispered Teresa, adjusting the blanket for 5-year-old Katie, who was already dead tired from the move. The girl muttered something in her sleep and buried her nose in the pillow. Katie's room was small, cozy, with a single window overlooking a deaf, weed-choked garden. And of course with that very wallpaper. In the light of the nightlight, the shadows from the branches stirred, creating an illusion of movement. Teresa turned off the light and joined Daniel in their bedroom. "Well," he hugged her from behind, inhaling the scent of her hair. "Our home. Ours," she smiled wearily. "Just very squeaky. Character." He kissed the top of her head. "It has character." They fell asleep listening to the new, unfamiliar sounds. The hum of wind in the chimney, the creaking of old beams, the mysterious rustles that always live in old houses. Teresa was awakened by a grinding sound. It was quiet but nasty, metallic, as if someone were slowly dragging a nail across a rusty sheet of iron. It didn't come from outside or the attic. It came from the wall, from behind the wallpapered partition separating their bedroom from Katie's room. Teresa froze, listening. Her heart hammered somewhere in her throat. The grinding repeated, more drawn out, this time more like a creak. "Dan," she quietly poked her husband in the side. "Dan, do you hear that?" Daniel mumbled something incoherent and turned over on his other side. "Dan, something scraping." He rose on his elbow, his eyes glued shut. "What?" "Mice, turds, rats, an old house. I'll buy poison tomorrow. Sleep." He collapsed onto the pillow and was snoring a moment later. Teresa listened for another 10 minutes, but the grinding didn't repeat. Deciding her husband was right, she drifted into a troubled, shallow sleep. In the morning, the house seemed welcoming and peaceful. Sunbeams played on the intricate pattern of the wallpaper in the living room, making it almost alive. The problem with the scraping faded into the background before the mountain of boxes that needed unpacking. The week flew by in the bustle of settling in. They arranged furniture, hung shelves, and tried to defeat the century-old dust in the floor cracks. The nightly creaks and grinding sounds repeated, becoming a familiar though unpleasant sound background. They were seriously considering calling exterminators, assuming hordes of woodworms in the walls. Everything changed on the morning of the 7th day. Katie was sitting at breakfast, listlessly poking her spoon into her oatmeal. She was in a bad mood, fussy and frowning. "What's wrong, sunshine?" Teresa crouched in front of her, moving a strand of chestnut hair from her daughter's forehead. "Didn't sleep well?" Katie nodded, puffing out her lips. The girl on the wall was crying again. Teresa smiled. "What girl?" "You must have dreamed it. I wasn't asleep," Katie said stubbornly. "She's there, in the branches. She's always sad, and yesterday she was crying, so very quietly. It keeps me awake." An icy needle pricked Teresa under the heart. She looked at Daniel. He shrugged, pretending to cut his toast with unnatural concentration. "It's just a pattern, sweetie," Teresa said gently. "Shadows. You know how sometimes patterns on a rug or wallpaper can look like things, like when we guess animals in the clouds." "It's not a pattern," Katie repeated stubbornly. "She's there. She has a face, and she's crying." Their daughter didn't bring it up again that day, engrossed in coloring a new book. but the anxiety stuck deep in Teresa like a splinter. She went into her daughter's room several times, peering at the intricate pattern. Just wallpaper, deep relief, play of light and shadow, nothing more. The next morning, Teresa woke her as usual by opening the curtains. Sunlight streamed into the room, and the woman froze in place, stunned. Right above Katie's headboard, on the pale green background of the wallpaper, a stain had appeared. Damp, yellowish-brown like rising damp, but its shape made the blood freeze in her veins. It was a face. No, of course, it was just a stain, a random trick of moisture and old paint. But the outlines were surprisingly clear. An oval face, 2 dark spots for eyes, a blurred line where a mouth should be. It looked astonishingly like a child's face in 3/4 profile, tilted in sorrow. "Dan," Teresa shouted, and her voice broke into a screech. "Dan, come here!" Daniel burst into the room, fastening his belt on the go. "What? What happened? Look!" She pointed a finger at the wall. He looked. He frowned. "A leak, damn it. Gotta check the roof or the pipes in the wall." "It's nothing, Turds, calm down." "Nothing." She laughed hysterically. "Don't you see? It's a face, the one Katie was talking about." Daniel looked more closely. A flicker of bewilderment, even a shadow of worry passed over his face, but he immediately pulled himself together. A coincidence. Pareidolia. You know, when the brain sees faces in random objects. The stain looks like one, yeah. A creepy coincidence. But it's just a stain. We'll air it out, wipe it down, then call a handyman. He opened the window, trying to hide his own anxiety. They didn't show the stain to Katie yet, taking her to the garden to play. But by evening, the stain had changed. It hadn't dried. It had become clearer, more defined. Now one could distinguish not just spot-like eyes, but eyelids, closed lashes, the contour of a nose, which no longer seemed just a blurred bulge but was taking on structure, as if someone was sculpting a sculpture underneath the wallpaper. The air in the room became thick and heavy. It smelled of old damp plaster and rotten leaves. "I'm calling an emergency service," Teresa announced, dialing the number of the management company with trembling hands. "This isn't normal. It's some kind of fungal mold, dangerous to health." The dispatcher on the other end promised to send a specialist in the morning. They had a terrible night. The scraping from behind the wall was no longer quiet and timid, but persistent, rhythmic, like the grinding of teeth. At times it transitioned into a quiet, barely audible cry. Now everyone could hear it. Even Daniel, pale and silent, sat gripping the armrests of his chair, his knuckles white. Katie slept with them, burying her face in Teresa's pillow and sobbing in her sleep. Teresa didn't sleep a wink. She tossed and turned, listening to the eerie sounds from the nursery, and her imagination painted the most terrifying pictures. Towards morning, when the first grey light began to break through the shutters, she couldn't take it anymore. "I can't do this anymore. I have to look." "Wait until morning," Daniel said hoarsely. His bravery had evaporated without a trace. "No, now." She got up, threw on her robe. Daniel, after a moment's hesitation, followed her. In his hand he clutched a heavy metal flashlight, a laughable weapon against the unknown. They froze on the threshold of Katie's room. Moonlight fell directly on the wall above the bed. Teresa made a sound somewhere between a moan and a gasp, and dug her fingers into her husband's arm. The stain had become 3-dimensional. Protruding from the wall, as if from soft plaster or compacted earth, was half of a child's face. The relief was perfect, sculptural, closed eyelids with long lashes, pale, full lips, a delicate chin. It was a girl, the one Katie had talked about. She seemed to be asleep, trapped in the thickness of the wall, and now was slowly, inch by inch, coming out into freedom. The wallpaper around her was dry and intact, as if the material for her birth was supplied from within, not from outside. "Almighty God," Daniel whispered. His face was ashen. This is impossible. He took a step forward slowly, as if in a dream, reached out his hand to touch this nightmare, to check if it was a mirage. At that moment, the girl's eyelashes fluttered. A slight, barely noticeable movement, full of inexpressible agony and fatigue. The eyelids tensed, as if the creature behind them was trying to wake up, to open its eyes and see the world into which it was being born. Teresa screamed. It was an inhuman animal scream of pure horror. She recoiled, dragging her stunned husband with her, and slammed the door to the room, as if trying to lock the nightmare itself inside. "Lock it. Now," she sobbed, leaning her back against the wood-paneled corridor wall. Daniel, with trembling hands, turned the key in the lock. The door to his daughter's room clicked shut. They stood in the semi-darkness of the corridor, listening to their hearts beating a rhythm of madness. Not a sound came from behind the door. The silence was worse than any grinding. "What do we do?" Daniel whispered, and his voice held a childlike helplessness. "We're leaving. Right now, immediately. We take Katie and go to a motel, and tomorrow we sell this cursed house, burn it down, I don't know." They rushed to pack, moving like automatons, dropping things, bumping into furniture. Katie, awakened by their running around, cried and asked what was happening. They didn't answer, wrapping her in a blanket. Teresa was the first to run outside to the car, carrying her daughter in her arms. A cold autumn drizzle was falling. Daniel rushed after her, locking the front door. He was already reaching for the car door handle when a sound came from the house. Not a grind, not a cry. A quiet but absolutely clear and distinct child's voice, full of genuine melancholy and plea, sounded right behind them, as if its source was just a few centimeters away. "Don't go. Don't leave me alone." Daniel turned around. In the window of Katie's room, which he was looking at, there was nothing. Just a dark square of glass. He yanked the car door open. "Go! Faster!" They drove out the gate and sped down the deserted street, not even knowing where they were going, just away from that place. Half an hour later, already on the highway leading downtown, Teresa finally caught her breath. She turned to the back seat to calm Katie. The girl was sitting, clutching a large doll to her chest and looking out the window. Her face was calm. "Mom," she said quietly, "she's not to blame, right? She's scared there all alone." "Who, honey?" Teresa asked, and her own voice sounded foreign to her. "The girl in the wall. She didn't mean to scare us. She was just looking for friends. And now, she's alone again." In the dark, Teresa didn't know what to say. She looked at her daughter, and the chilling horror, already familiar and sticky, began to creep back into her heart. Because the doll that Katie was clutching so tightly to herself was old, battered, with a porcelain face. They had never had a doll like that, and the fabric of its dress was of that very pattern, pale green, with an infinite pattern of intertwining branches. The fourth story. The Staircase Keeper. It all started with a dusty folio I bought at a sale in Salt Lake City. The book smelled of time, mold, and secrets. Forgotten mansions of Utah, legends and lore. Most of the stories were standard tourist bait. Weeping wives of gold prospectors, ghosts of cowboys, curses of apostate Mormons. But one chapter, short, almost thrown in as an afterthought, hooked me, Jeremy Stake, like a fish hook in my gut. It was about the Aldridge Mansion on the very outskirts of Orem. Not about the ghosts of the Aldridge family, no. About the staircase. A marble, wide, grand staircase that had miraculously survived while the mansion itself slowly died, being dismantled for building materials and looted by marauders. Locals, according to the book, gave this place a wide berth, and the reason was a strange arithmetic. Everyone who dared to climb these stairs counted exactly 30 steps. But sometimes, if you went up without counting, without paying attention, there turned out to be 31. The 31st step, the superstitious whispered, led not to the second floor but to some other place, or to some other being. My channel, Stakes Ghost Hunt, was going through a rough patch. Viewers were tired of whispers in static noise and floating dust particles passed off as orbs. I needed a trump card, a sharp, irrefutable proof. This staircase was the perfect candidate. The drive to Orem took several hours. The mansion itself, or rather what was left of it, appeared before me as a gloomy silhouette against a crimson sunset. The house looked like a corpse from which all the insides had been gutted. There were no windows, no doors. Part of the roof had collapsed, exposing the ribs of the rafters. And only one detail shone with an unnaturally white, virginal light in the twilight. That very marble staircase. It wasn't just preserved. It was perfect. No chips, no cracks, no patina of time. It seemed like it had been brought from Italy and installed in this ruin just yesterday. The contrast was so frightening that a shiver ran down my spine, the first, but far from the last. I set up cameras on tripods, one downstairs in the hall, aimed at the beginning of the ascent, the second, upstairs, to film the final part of the climb. I checked the equipment, full battery charge, clean memory card, a switched-on digital voice recorder in my pocket. A flashlight in my left hand, the main camera in my right. A deep breath. I hit record. Hey everyone, it's Jeremy Stake, and you're on Stake's Ghost Hunt. Today we're in the legendary cursed Aldridge Mansion, and before me is that very staircase. The locals claim it has a changing number of steps, 30 or 31. Let's check it out. Starting the ascent. Watch the count. I stepped onto the first step. The marble was icy. I could feel it even through the soles of my boots. 1. My steps echoed in the empty hall, as if someone was walking beside me, invisible, matching my rhythm. 2. 3. I tried to speak clearly, looking into the lens, but with my peripheral vision I noted the unnatural whiteness of the steps. They seemed to glow from within. 10. 11. Halfway up the air changed. It became thicker, heavier. The smell of decay and dust was replaced by something sharp, metallic, almost like ozone after a thunderstorm. I stumbled for a moment, feeling a slight dizziness. All good. Just a little pressure drop, I muttered for the viewers and for myself. 20. 21. It became harder to climb. My legs felt like lead. It felt like I was climbing a mountain, not a flat staircase. I began to feel a presence behind my back. A classic feeling for any stalker. A trick of the inflamed mind. I was used to ignoring it. 28. My voice trembled. My throat was dry. 29. I froze, ready to take the last step. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. I was afraid there would be 30 steps, that it was all just a fairy tale, that I had come here for nothing and hoped for nothing. I took a step, 30. I was at the top, on the second floor, as cracked and dirty as everything else in this house. Disappointment washed over me, bitter and sour. Damn it, really? Just a staircase, no magic. A stupid rural tall tale. I exhaled, lowered the camera, and turned around to look down at the marble flight shining in the darkness, and I froze, right in my back. In the area between my shoulder blades, something hard and unbearably cold pressed. The cold pierced my jacket, sweater, t-shirt, skin, reaching the very bones. At the same time, a ragged, wet, wheezing breath fell on my neck, on the unprotected patch of skin below the back of my head. It was thick, enveloping, with a smell of old blood, damp earth, and something unknown that made my stomach clench reflexively. I couldn't move. My brain refused to process what was happening. This was not a trick of the mind. This was physical, real, tangible. "Do not turn around," a voice sounded. It was right at my ear. Quiet, creaky like rot, but so saturated with ancient, bottomless malice that the hair under my hat stood on end. "Do not turn around, Jeremy Stake. You counted. You counted the steps. You were looking for us, and you found us. But the game is only beginning. The rules are simple. Do not look at me. Go back down. Do not count the steps. If you count 31, you will stay here. Forever. You will become part of the staircase. The new keeper." The breathing became heavier, hotter. It felt like it was burning my skin. "If you miscount, I will have you." The icy pressure between my shoulder blades disappeared. The breathing retreated. I could move. I stood, shaking with a coarse tremor as if in a fever. Downstairs in the hall, a red light on the camera was blinking. Everything was being broadcast live. They saw it all. Did they hear it all? Or was it just for me? I had to go down. Without counting, how? It's impossible. The staircase was right in front of me. I couldn't help but see it. I took the first step down. My foot found the convex edge of a step. My brain, on autopilot, was already ready to say 30. I clenched my teeth, trying to force the internal counter into the darkest corner of my consciousness. A second step. A third. I descended, staring at the screen of the camera I held in front of me. I was looking at the picture from the camera, not at the actual steps. It was a little easier. On the screen, I only saw a piece of marble going down. No count, no landmarks, but with every step the tension grew. Behind my back, I felt him again. It was following me. I heard a quiet shuffling sound. Pieces of that vile breathing reached me. It was in no hurry. It was waiting. It knew I would make a mistake, the middle of the staircase. The air thickened again, became viscous like syrup. It was unbearably hard to walk. My temples were pounding. 15, 16. No, don't count. I was fighting myself against the brain's basic instinct to organize space, and then I realized I was walking in complete silence. The crickets outside the windows had stopped chirping. The wind had died down. The creaking of the floorboards had ceased. All that was left was the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs and that same shuffling step behind me. I risked a glance over the camera. About a dozen steps remained to the bottom. 10, 12, 15, I didn't know. I wasn't supposed to know. And then the camera in my hand gave a quiet click and went dead. The battery died. For less than a second, my gaze fell on the staircase in front of me. And I saw not clean marble. The steps below me were different. They seemed darker, almost black. And there were faces on them, distorted by a grimace of eternal horror and pain, sealed in stone. They looked at me with empty eye sockets, screaming soundlessly. These were those who had made a mistake before me. Panic, wild, all-consuming, grabbed me by the throat. I forgot all the rules. I ran down this hellish staircase, thinking of nothing but escape. My foot found the next step. And another. And another. I jumped over 2, over 3. I was almost flying. The dirty floor of the hall was already visible below. Just a little more. I made a final, desperate jump from the height that was under my feet and landed on the hard, dusty ground of the floor. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, sweaty and shaking. I did it. I broke free. The euphoria lasted exactly until the moment I lifted my head and looked at the staircase. I was not in the hall. I was in some other absolutely black void. The only source of light, that same marble staircase going up into endless darkness. And on it, on the step from which I had jumped, stood it. Its form was blurred and unclear, just a clot of darkness and cold, distorting the space around it. And only 2 eyes burned in that darkness, like hot coals full of hatred and hunger. You counted 31. The familiar, terrible voice creaked. It sounded not by my ear now, but everywhere, filling the entire black void. You ran. You lost count. And you miscounted. I tried to scream, but only a wheeze came out. I lunged away, but where to? There was only darkness around. Do not rush, new keeper, the thing hissed. It began to slowly descend towards me. Its form flowed, touching the steps where the sealed faces stirred, trying to break free. We have an eternity, a whole eternity for you to get used to your new job. It approached me. An icy cold knocked me onto my back. Your task is simple. Wait for the next one. Count their steps. And take those who make a mistake. Its incorporeal but incredibly strong hand grabbed my shoulder. The pain was unbearable, as if my bone was breaking. And now, take your place. It dragged me to the staircase. To the very bottom, the first step. The stone beneath me became soft, pliable like thick resin. It began to suck me in. I fought, screamed, tried to break free, but it was useless. The stone slowly, relentlessly consumed my legs, thighs, chest. Horror bound me tighter than any chains. The last thing I saw before the marble closed over my head was the staircase shining in the darkness and the burning coals of my keeper's eyes. And then came the knowledge. I became part of the staircase. I saw everything. I felt every speck of dust on my surface. I was the stone, and I waited. Time passed. A month, a year, a century. There was no time in this void. But one day, in the distant real world, a door creaked. A beam of a flashlight broke into my void. Someone's cautious steps, and a young, excited voice. Guys, look! The legend is true. There are 30 of them. Or 31. Let me count. 1, 2, 3. I felt my stone, my flesh vibrate under his foot. I felt his living, hot energy. And I felt the hunger of the one who stood at the top, invisible, waiting. And I, the new keeper of the staircase, holding a breath I no longer had, began my soundless count. The fifth story. The Hungry Foundation, 10th Avenue. A street that was once an artery of the city, now just a god-forsaken scar. And on its very edge, clinging to the earth with crooked blackened beams, stood the house. It hadn't just been abandoned. It had succumbed. It looked as if the very structure of the building had surrendered under the weight of an unspeakable secret. Its contours leaned inward, as if ashamed of its own existence. The floors had sunk into the ground, forming unnatural, gaping depressions like sores on the body of a tree. Locals turning off 10th Avenue onto the busy highway preferred not to look its way and would cross themselves. They whispered over mugs of warm beer in Harry's bar that the house wasn't crumbling but sinking under the weight of what it had eaten. And it wasn't a metaphor. Alexa Merrick had heard those whispers. She collected them like grim trading cards, jotting them down in her iPhone's notes app next to her Dungeons & Dragons schedule and grocery lists. For her and her best friend, Verona Shaikh, the abandoned places of St. Louis and its outskirts were more than just entertainment. They were oxygen, an antidote to the suffocating boredom of quantum physics lectures and art history seminars. Their Honda Civic, plastered with anime character stickers, jerked off the asphalt of 10th Avenue and came to a halt on the edge of a weed-choked lot. The house stood in the distance, dark and crooked, like a rotten tooth against the fading evening sky. Well, ready for your close-up? Verona pulled out her beloved DSLR camera, her dark blue polished fingers checking the settings out of habit. Her black hair, dyed acid pink at the roots, was tied in a messy bun. Looks more like it's ready to collapse if you sneeze on it. Alexa snorted, but the same excited fire burned in her eyes. She adjusted her glasses and switched on a powerful flashlight. Let's go, before the darkness gets absolute. 10th Avenue isn't the place to linger after sunset. The air inside was thick and stifling. It didn't just smell of dust and mold, but of something deeper, more ancient. The smell of damp earth from a freshly dug grave mixed with the sweetish stench of rotting meat. The floor underfoot was strangely soft, pliable like soil dusted with powder. It sprang back with every step, and Alexa thought she heard a faint, moist crunch from under the floorboards. God, It's like walking on a giant underbaked pie, she muttered, trying not to breathe through her nose. Look. Verona was already in the center of the living room, her lens aimed into the yawning blackness of a huge hole in the floor. The hole was the main attraction, the epicenter of all this place's ugliness. Its edges were ragged, unnatural, as if the floor hadn't cracked but had been torn apart from the inside. From the depths rose that very smell, dampness, and something sweetly rotten that tickled the nostrils and induced nausea. Perfect shot for Instagram, Verona said with forced bravado. Hashtag house cannibal, hashtag ghost catch off the week. The local legends of 10th Avenue are true. Just be careful. Alexa's voice sounded anxious. She didn't like how the floor sagged under Verona's weight, how small pieces of rotten wood broke off from the edge of the hole and silently disappeared into the darkness. That thing looks unstable. Relax, sweetie. Just for a second, I want to capture the abyss itself. Look, down there. It's like something's moving. It was the fatal phrase. The camera clicked, the flash blinding them for a moment and illuminating peeling wallpaper, tatters of plaster hanging from the ceiling. Verona took another step to get a different angle. That step was the last one of her life on the surface. From the darkness, something shot out. Pale, almost white, sticky and shiny, like the skin of a giant blind worm. It was as thick as her arm and moved with a sinister, reflexive precision. A tentacle. It was a tentacle. It wrapped around her ankle with a force that knocked the wind out of her. The grip was icy, piercingly cold, and impossibly strong. Alexa! The scream was short and full of pure, unfiltered horror. Verona crashed to the floor, which suddenly ceased to be just rotten wood. It became viscous, alive, turning into quicksand. Her hands clawed at the floorboards, but they crumbled into dust, offering no resistance. Verona! Hold on! Instinct made Alexa rush forward. She grabbed her friend under the arms, trying to pull her out. But it was like trying to uproot a tree that had sent its roots into hell itself. Her own legs were sinking into the suddenly animate, greedy floor. It's pulling! Verona screamed. Her eyes, wide with terror, were filled with tears. Alex, it's pulling me! The tentacle tightened, its sticky, cold flesh adhering to her skin. A faint rustling sound came from the hole, a multitude of sounds, as if a whole swarm was stirring down there. Alexa looked around desperately, searching for salvation. Her gaze fell on a rotten beam lying nearby. She let go with one hand, reaching for it. But at that moment the floor under Verona gave way completely. Verona let out a piercing, soul-rending shriek that was immediately swallowed by the house's insatiable maw. Alexa, still holding her, felt with horror how her friend was being pulled down sharply and powerfully. No! She saw it. She saw what was revealed to Verona in the last seconds of her life. The hole wasn't just a pit. It was a throat, and in its depths, on the walls of soil, rubble, and rotten beams, they squirmed. Thousands, tens of thousands of the same pale, sticky tentacles. They writhed, intertwined and untwined, like a giant ball of blind, hungry worms. They covered every space, going down into an unimaginable depth, into the very womb of this place. And amidst this squirming nightmare, Alexa saw something else. Something large, pulsating, resembling a giant ulcerated internal organ. And it made a sound, a quiet, wet, contented sound. Chafk, chafk, chafk. As if a huge, jawless mouth was chewing, savoring, enjoying. It was the sound of satiety. Verona was dragged down, tentacles now wrapping around her thighs, her waist greedily probing the new food. Her screams became muffled, choked. Her eyes, full of blind, animal terror, met Alexa's for the last time, and the darkness consumed her. The tentacle holding her ankle released her with a disgusting smacking sound and slid back into the hole. Like a tongue retrieving a crumb from a lip, silence fell. Heavy, thick ringing. It no longer smelled just of rot. It smelled of fresh, recently eaten meat and something coppery, metallic. Blood. The house on 10th Avenue was full. But not for long. Alexa froze on her knees, sweat streaming down her forehead, mixing with tears. Her mind refused to process what had happened. It was a prank, a terrible sick prank. Any second now, Verona would crawl out from around the corner, laughing. But from the hole, now almost at her very knees, that sound continued. A quiet, contented munching sound. Chufk, chufk, chufk. It grew slightly louder, richer. The house was savoring, relishing, and then the sound stopped. It was replaced by another, a quiet, impatient rumbling. And the tentacles in the depths stirred again, but now their movements weren't sluggish but probing, curious. They reached upward, toward the edge of the hole, toward Alexa. She scrambled backward, her heart hammering so hard it was about to jump out of her chest. Her rational, scientifically trained mind searched for explanations. A giant fungal mycelium, a colony of mutated worms, hallucinations from mold. But her ancient animal part knew the truth. This house was alive. It was hungry, and it was already hungry again. The first tentacle, pale and wet, crawled out of the chasm and lightly, almost tenderly, touched her sneaker. With a shriek born from the very depths of her soul, Alexa jumped to her feet and bolted for the exit. The floor beneath her moved in waves, trying to capture her, slow her down. She ran, stumbling over the ruins of furniture, brushing aside cobwebs that now seemed like predatory nets. Behind her she heard a rustling. Not one but many. The rustling of many slippery bodies crawling out of their den to pursue the prey. She burst out of the house, driven by adrenaline and pure fear, and ran to the car without looking back. Clutching the door handle with trembling fingers, she risked a glance back. The house on 10th Avenue stood as before, quiet, dark, cursed. But now Alexa knew. She knew it wasn't just a building. It was a mall, a giant, ancient maw disguised as ruins. She started the car and peeled out, kicking up clouds of dust, speeding onto the deserted 10th Avenue. She raced down the empty road, stomping on the gas, unable to stop shaking. She was safe. She had gotten out. Then her phone vibrated. Once, a message. With mad hope, she looked at the screen. Maybe Verona. Maybe she got out the other side. Was it possible? But on the screen glowed the sender's name, Verona. Alexa's heart stopped. Slowly, as if in a nightmare, she opened the message. There was no text. Only a shared location and one photograph. The photograph was taken from the darkness, from below looking up. It was her. Alexa. She was on her knees at the edge of the hole, her face distorted with horror, her hand stretched out toward the spot where Verona had just disappeared. The image was blurry, fuzzy, as if taken through a tear or through a layer of sticky slime, and below the photo was a map. A blinking dot showed her current exact location. She was only 5 miles from the house on 10th Avenue. It knew where she was. It was tracking her. Then a second message came. Text this time. Just 3 words typed from her dead friend's account. It's still hungry. The 6th story, The Hounds of the Cursed Mansion, Texas. Endless expanses soaked in sun and dust, where small towns along rivers live their measured, sleepy lives, guarding other people's secrets. Riverton was just such a town, nestled quietly on a bend of the muddy Brazos River. And 1.5 miles from it, on the outskirts, behind a high, half-collapsed wrought-iron fence, stood the Alvarez mansion. It wasn't just abandoned, it had petrified in its silent grandeur. It once belonged to Carlos El Sombrero Alvarez, the most powerful and ruthless drug lord on the entire coast. They said that invisible strings ran from his second-floor study, controlling the destinies of the entire state. But a competitor's bullet found him even here. After a quick and secret funeral, all the servants, guards, cooks, maids scattered within a day as if on command, abandoning all the master's accumulated goods. They left, packing their cars with suitcases of money and loot, but they left something behind. The dogs. An old German belief says, when the master of a house dies, His soul moves into his dog to guard his accumulated wealth. Carlos Alvarez didn't have a soul. He had a knot of malice, greed, and paranoia, and he didn't have one dog but a whole pack. Loyal, mean, trained to rip out throats at the snap of a finger, they remained. They didn't go anywhere. The house was their fortress, their kennel, their kingdom, and they were its only living guardians. The locals gave the mansion a wide berth. They whispered that at night you could hear not barking, but a quiet, rippling growl, as if the beasts were talking among themselves in a forgotten language. They said that El Sombrero's dogs did not age or die, that they fed on the ghosts of their master and on those who dared to disturb their peace. 3 homeless men, caught by an autumn downpour on a dirt road leading nowhere, didn't know this. Their names were Leo, Mikey, and Old Tom. The rain lashed their freezing backs with icy whips, turning the road into a mess of mud. They were just looking for a place to spend the night, a roof over their heads, a dry corner. "Look," hissed Mikey, the youngest of them, pointing a trembling hand at the black outline of the mansion silhouetted against the stormy sky. "A house. A big one, damn it!" Leo, their unofficial leader, squinting in the rain, assessed the situation. A high fence, massive gates, slightly ajar and creaking in the wind. "Not a single light. Abandoned," he grunted, wiping his wet face. "Looks rich. Maybe some grub left too." Old Tom, who had seen things and smelled of cheap wine and sorrow, shifted uneasily. "I don't like this place." "Leo, my gut tells me something's bad here." "Your gut only senses the last bottle," Leo snapped. "Or do you prefer to soak here until morning?" "Let's go." They slipped through the gates. The yard was overgrown with waist-high weeds, among which stood the skeletons of luxurious but dead rose bushes. The house itself was impressive. 3 floors, columns, peeling stucco. The windows were like blind eyes covered in dust and cobwebs. Everything exuded not just neglect, but a sinister, oppressive calm. It smelled of dampness, rotting wood, and something else. Sweetish, cloying, barely perceptible, as if something had been spilled here long ago, expensive wine or perfume, and the smell had seeped into the walls forever. "So quiet," Mikey whispered, and his whisper seemed as loud as a gunshot in the deathly silence. Even the rain drumming on the roof sounded muffled. Leo found the door. It was massive, oak, with a stained glass insert, but someone had smashed the glass long ago. He slipped his hand through, found the latch inside, and with a heavy creak, the door gave way. The air that rushed out to meet them was stale and cold. It smelled of dust, mold, and that same sweetish stench. Only here it was much stronger. "Here's our palace," Leo said with feigned bravado, stepping inside. They found themselves in a huge hall with a grand staircase leading upstairs. In the gloom, the outlines of expensive furniture covered with white sheets could be made out, like ghosts frozen in a silent dance. Empty frames hung on the walls. The paintings had obviously been taken away. A thick layer of dust lay on the parquet floor, and not a single track was visible on it. Not from a mouse, not from a bird. No one's. "Some digs," Mikey whistled, pulling out a lighter. The small flame illuminated the marble floor, a crystal chandelier on the ceiling, and huge, long-dried brown splashes on the wall by the stairs. Mikey quickly lowered his hand. "All right, guys, let's get settled," Leo commanded. "Find the kitchen, maybe there are cans. We'll light a fire in the fireplace. Dry off." They moved deeper into the house, their footsteps echoing loudly under the high ceilings. Old Tom trudged behind, constantly looking back. He fancied that they were being watched from the dark doorways. "Leo," he called softly, "let's get out of here." "Cut it out, old man," Leo grumbled, opening a door to what appeared to be a dining room. "You're seeing things everywhere." He didn't finish. From the darkness of the room, a low, chesty growl reached them. It was so deep and angry that the air seemed to tremble. The lighter in Mikey's hand went out as his hand suddenly shook. The next second, something appeared in the doorway outlined by the faint light from the windows. A huge Rottweiler. Its skin was scarred, one eye clouded with a cataract, and saliva dripped from its slightly open mouth. But the most terrifying thing was its eyes. The other eye, the healthy one, looked at them not with an animal, but with a kind of human, cold, conscious gaze, full of hatred and contempt. The growl repeated, and now it came not only from the front, it came from the right, in the living room, from the left, in the corridor, and from behind, near the front door. Quiet, threatening sounds merging into a horrific symphony. "Dogs," old Tom whispered doomedly. "I told you." "Back to the door," Leo commanded, his voice trembling. They backed into the hall, but the retreat was already cut off. From the living room, a shepherd, thin as a skeleton with worn-out fur and mad, hungry eyes, literally crawled out on its belly. From behind the stairs emerged a mastiff the size of a calf, its muzzle covered in old battle scars. There were 5 of them. 6. 7. They emerged from the darkness, silent except for that incessant growling. They moved not like a pack of strays, but like a well-coordinated combat unit. They surrounded them, cutting off all escape routes. Merciful God. Mikey pressed his back against the cold wall, his face white as chalk. The dogs approached slowly, unhurriedly, savoring the moment, seeing their fear. Their paws stepped silently on the dusty floor. And then Leo, driven by blind panic, made a fatal mistake. He dashed to the fireplace, grabbed a heavy iron poker, and with a wild cry, swung it at the nearest Rottweiler. It was the signal. The pack exploded in silent fury. The Rottweiler, without making a sound, lunged forward and sank its teeth into Leo's arm holding the poker. The bone crunched. Leo screamed. The scream was deafeningly loud in the silence of the house. Mikey, crazed with terror, tried to run for the stairs. The shepherd and another dog, a Doberman mix of some unseen breed, caught him on the 3rd step. They silently, with terrible efficiency, dragged him to the floor. Old Tom froze in place, crying and muttering prayers. No one attacked him. The dogs, having dealt with Leo and Mikey, simply stood around him, forming a tight ring. They looked at him with their inhumanly intelligent eyes, and saliva dripped from their bared maws onto the expensive parquet. His companion's screams died down as suddenly as they had begun. Now only the heavy breathing of the dogs and a quiet, contented crunching could be heard. Tom stood, unable to move, understanding he was next. He waited for the attack, waited for the pain. But it didn't come. Instead, the mastiff, the largest of them, slowly walked right up to him. Tom squeezed his eyes shut, expecting a bite. But the dog just nudged his worn jacket with its wet nose, sniffed him, and walked away. Then it turned, and slowly walked deeper into the house toward the study. It took a few steps and turned back, looked at Tom as if inviting him to follow. The other dogs didn't move, leaving him a narrow passage. Trembling in every limb, not understanding what was happening, Tom shuffled after the mastiff. He was being led. He walked down the corridor, past dogs frozen in silent poses, feeling their heavy gazes on him. The mastiff led him to a massive oak door at the end of the corridor. That door, El Sombrero's study. The dog scratched the door with its paw and let out a quiet, completely undog-like howl. Its voice held not anger, but longing. Infinite, all-consuming longing. Tom, obeying some inexplicable impulse, pressed the handle. The door was locked. The mastiff howled again, and now Tom saw not just anger in its eyes, but a plea. He recoiled. He thought someone was behind that door. Someone was waiting. He couldn't take it anymore. He turned and ran. He ran through the hall, stepping over dark, sticky puddles on the floor, not looking at what was left of his friends. The dogs didn't chase him. They just watched him go, standing motionless like statues. He burst out of the house, stumbled over the threshold, fell into the mud, got up and ran, not choosing the path, in the pouring rain. He ran until there was no air left in his lungs, until the lights of the town appeared in the distance. He was picked up on the highway the next morning by the local police. He was in shock, muttering something incoherent about dogs, about the mansion, about eyes that looked human. The sheriff, a fat, tired man, listened to him and sighed heavily. "Again," he said to his deputy. "Again those damn dogs." They drove to the Alvarez mansion. The rain had stopped, and the morning was grey and cold. The gates were still ajar. Not a single dog was visible in the yard. They entered the house. The hall was empty. The parquet was licked clean. No traces of blood, no bodies, no scraps of clothing, only dust and silence. "Looking for a place to sleep?" the sheriff asked, addressing Tom, who stood on the threshold, pale and shaking. Tom nodded silently. "No, one tells them." The sheriff shook his head, examining the empty walls. "El Sombrero's dogs don't touch anyone if they don't touch his stuff. They guard his things, his house, his memory, and those who come inside with bad thoughts." He didn't finish. His gaze fell on the huge mastiff standing at the top of the stairs and looking down at them. Its eyes were old, wise, and infinitely sad. They just clean up, erase the traces, like they did when the master was alive. The mastiff growled quietly, and the sound was like the creaking of an old door. The dog turned and slowly walked away into the depths of the second floor. "Let's go," the sheriff said firmly, taking Tom by the arm, "and don't you ever set foot here again. They let you go. They warned you. There won't be a second chance." They went outside. Tom turned around one last time. In one of the blind windows on the second floor, he saw a shadow, tall, thin, in a wide-brimmed hat, and next to it, the silhouettes of several dogs sitting obediently and devotedly at their master's feet. The house stood silently, guarding its terrible secret. And its faithful hounds, the hounds of the cursed mansion, were its eternal, insatiable guardians. They hadn't gone anywhere. They were waiting for the next victim who would covet someone else's goods. And the rain, which would soon come again, would wash all traces from the road leading to this place.